The dust settled on the hiring line outside the Crossed Swords Ranch as Beatrice Dawson stepped forward with her chin held high, and every man present turned to stare at the young woman who dared to apply for ranch work in the scorching summer of 1881. She had traveled 3 weeks from Missouri after her father's death left her with nothing but debts and a fierce determination to make her own way in this world. San Antonio, Texas had seemed like a promising fresh start, a place where cattle ranches sprawled across endless acres and always needed hands. She had not expected the foreman to look at her as though she were made of spun sugar instead of flesh and bone. "Madam, I think you have the wrong line," Foreman Marcus Webb said, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. He was a thick-bodied man in his 50s with a sun-weathered face and eyes that had seen too many seasons to be fooled by a pretty face. "The main house sometimes needs kitchen help or laundry girls. You should inquire there." Beatrice kept her expression neutral, despite the heat rising in her cheeks. She had anticipated this reaction. At 22 years old, with honey-colored hair that caught the sunlight and delicate features that her mother had once called porcelain, she knew she did not look like someone who could rope cattle or mend fences. But looks, as her father had taught her during those years they worked their small farm together, meant nothing when it came to survival. "I am in the correct line," she replied firmly. "I can ride, rope, and I am not afraid of hard work. I grew up on a farm, and I can handle whatever tasks you need done." Several of the men in line behind her chuckled, and the foreman's expression shifted from polite dismissal to something almost pitying. "Miss, I am sure you worked hard on your family's farm, but ranch work is different. It is dangerous, exhausting, and frankly, you are too pretty for that kind of hard work. The sun alone would ruin that fair skin of yours within a week. The cattle do not care how determined you are. They will trample you just as soon as look at you." The words stung more than Beatrice wanted to admit. She had heard variations of this her entire life. Too pretty to take seriously. Too delicate to be capable. As if beauty and strength could not exist in the same person. She opened her mouth to argue, to demand he at least give her a chance to prove herself, when a voice cut through the tension. "She is tougher than you know." Every head turned toward the man who spoke. He stood slightly apart from the hiring line, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed over his chest. Isaac Keller was 26 years old and had worked the Crossed Swords Ranch for the past 3 years, earning a reputation as one of the best cowhands in the territory. Tall and lean with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, he had the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years spent under the Texas sun. His blue eyes, startling against his tanned face, were fixed on the foreman with an expression that suggested he would not back down easily. Marcus Webb frowned. "Keller, this does not concern you. Get back to your work." "With respect, Marcus, it does concern me." Isaac pushed off from the fence and walked closer, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. "We are short-handed after losing 3 men to that trail drive to Kansas. You have been complaining about it for weeks, and here is someone willing to work, but you are turning her away because of how she looks." "I am turning her away because she will last maybe a day before she realizes this is not some romantic adventure," Marcus shot back. "Ranch work will break her." "Then let her prove you wrong." Isaac's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "Give her a week. If she cannot handle it, she leaves. No harm done. But if she can do the work, we get an extra hand we desperately need." Beatrice felt a strange mixture of gratitude and irritation at this stranger's intervention. She appreciated his defense, but she did not need a man to fight her battles. Still, if he could convince the foreman to give her a chance, she would take it. She met Isaac's eyes briefly and saw something there. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, as though he understood what it felt like to be underestimated. Marcus looked between Isaac and Beatrice, his jaw working as he considered. Finally, he sighed heavily. 1 week. You will work under Keller's supervision since he is so confident in you. But I warn you, miss, we will not go easy on you because you are a woman. You will do the same work as everyone else, and if you cannot keep up, you are out. Understood?" "Understood," Beatrice said quickly, before he could change his mind. "Thank you, sir. You will not regret this." "I already regret it," Marcus muttered, waving her off. "Keller, she is your responsibility. Get her settled and put to work." As the foreman turned to address the other men in line, Isaac gestured for Beatrice to follow him. They walked in silence toward the bunkhouse. the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. Beatrice carried her single-worn carpet bag, which contained everything she owned in the world: 2 changes of clothes, her mother's wedding ring, and her father's old pocket watch. "Thank you for speaking up," Beatrice said finally, breaking the silence. "Though I should tell you I did not need rescuing." Isaac glanced at her, and she caught the hint of amusement in his expression. "I was not rescuing you. I was being practical. We need workers, and Marcus lets his prejudices get in the way of good sense sometimes. Still, I appreciate it." They reached the bunkhouse, a long wooden structure with a covered porch running its length. Isaac paused at the door, then seemed to reconsider. "You cannot stay here. It is all men, and that would not be appropriate. There is a small storage shed behind the barn that we converted into a room last year when the owner's nephew visited. It is not much, but it has a bed and a door that locks. That will have to do." "That sounds perfect," Beatrice said honestly. Privacy would be a luxury she had not expected. Isaac led her around the barn to a small wooden structure that was indeed barely larger than a shed. But when he opened the door, she saw it was clean and dry, with a narrow bed, a small table, and a window that let in light. After sleeping on the ground during much of her journey to Texas, it looked like paradise. "Get settled," Isaac said. "Then meet me at the corral in 20 minutes. I want to see if you can actually ride like you claim." His tone was challenging, but not unkind. Beatrice set down her bag and met his gaze directly. "I will be there in 15. True to her word, Beatrice arrived at the corral wearing her most practical dress, a faded blue cotton with the hem already dusty from weeks of travel, and her father's old work boots that were slightly too large but broken in perfectly. Isaac was waiting with 2 horses already saddled. One was a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her face. The other was a rangy chestnut gelding that pranced nervously. Isaac gestured to the mare. "This is Daisy. She is steady and forgiving, good for someone getting reacquainted with riding." Beatrice walked past Daisy and approached the chestnut instead. The horse tossed his head, but she spoke softly to him, letting him catch her scent before running her hand down his neck. "What is his name?" "That is Rusty. He is temperamental and not suitable for a beginning rider." "Good thing I am not a beginner then." Before Isaac could protest, Beatrice put her foot in the stirrup and swung herself up into the saddle with practiced ease. Rusty danced sideways, testing her, but she adjusted her balance and held the reins with firm confidence. The horse settled almost immediately, recognizing a capable rider. Isaac's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his calm demeanor. "All right then, let us see how you do at a gallop." He mounted Daisy with fluid grace and urged the mare into a trot toward the open range beyond the corral. Beatrice touched her heels to Rusty's sides, and the gelding leaped forward eagerly. The wind whipped at her hair as they galloped across the scrubland, dodging mesquite bushes and jumping a small creek. For the first time since her father's death, Beatrice felt something close to joy. This was what she needed: open space, honest work, and the freedom to prove herself. They rode hard for nearly an hour, with Isaac occasionally testing her with sharp turns or challenging terrain. By the time they returned to the ranch, both horses were lathered, and Beatrice's face was flushed from exertion and heat. But she was smiling. Isaac dismounted and studied her with a new expression, something between respect and curiosity. "You can ride, I will give you that." "I told you I could," Beatrice said, sliding down from Rusty's back. Her legs wobbled slightly from the long ride, but she forced herself to stand steady. "Riding is only part of it. Tomorrow starts the real work." His tone was serious now. "We will be mending fences in the east pasture. That means digging post holes, stretching wire, and working under the sun for 10 to 12 hours. It is brutal, and there is no shame in admitting it is too much." Beatrice met his eyes. "I will be there. What time?" "Dawn. Do not be late." That night, Beatrice lay in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, men's voices drifting from the bunkhouse, the whisper of wind through the barn's weathered boards. Her body ached from the ride, and she knew tomorrow would be infinitely harder. But she had taken the first step. She had a job, even if only for a week, and a chance to prove that she was more than what people saw when they looked at her face. She thought about Isaac Keller, the cowboy who had spoken up for her when he had no reason to. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, not the dismissive pity of the foreman or the leering interest some of the other men had shown. It was more like recognition, as though he saw past her appearance to the determination beneath. She found herself hoping she would not disappoint him. Sleep came fitfully, and when the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Beatrice was already awake and dressed. She splashed water on her face from the basin on the small table, braided her hair tightly to keep it out of the way, and headed toward the barn where Isaac had told her to meet him. He was already there, loading tools into the back of a wagon: post-hole diggers, hammers, coils of wire, and wooden fence posts. He looked up when she approached and nodded once. "You are early. That is good." Two other ranch hands joined them, both young men who eyed Beatrice with undisguised skepticism. The taller one, who introduced himself as Pete, made a show of taking the heavier tools before Beatrice could reach for them. "No offense, miss, but you should probably stick to handing us the nails and such." "None taken," Beatrice said pleasantly, though irritation simmered beneath her calm exterior. "But I will do my share of the work." The ride to the east pasture took nearly an hour in the loaded wagon. The sun climbed steadily, and by the time they arrived at the section of fence that needed repair, the temperature was already oppressive. Long stretches of wire had been pulled down, likely by cattle or perhaps damaged in a recent storm. Several posts had rotted through and needed replacing entirely. Isaac divided up the work with quiet authority. "Pete, you and Thomas start pulling up the old posts. Beatrice and I will dig the new holes." Pete opened his mouth as if to object, then seemed to think better of it under Isaac's steady gaze. The four of them spread out along the fence line and set to work. Digging post holes in the hard Texas earth was exactly as brutal as Isaac had warned. The post hole digger was heavy, and each thrust into the ground yielded only a few inches of progress. The sun beat down relentlessly, and within an hour Beatrice's dress was soaked with sweat. Her hands, soft from weeks of not working, began to blister almost immediately. But she gritted her teeth and kept digging. Isaac worked beside her, his movements efficient and practiced. He did not speak much, but she caught him glancing at her periodically, as though checking to see when she would give up. That alone was enough to keep her going. She would not give him or anyone else the satisfaction of proving them right about her. By midday they had replaced 6 posts and restrung most of the damaged wire. Beatrice's arms trembled with exhaustion, and the blisters on her palms had broken, making every grip of the tools agonizing. But when Isaac called for a break and passed around canteens of water and strips of dried beef, she accepted them with a quiet thank you and sat down in the meager shade of the wagon without complaint. Pete and Thomas talked quietly between themselves, occasionally shooting looks in her direction. Isaac settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the space between them. "How are your hands?" he asked quietly. Beatrice looked down at her palms, raw and bleeding in places. "They will toughen up." "Let me see." It was not quite a command, but there was enough concern in his voice that she extended her hands toward him. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he examined the damage, his calloused hands rough against her softer skin. "You should have said something. I have bandages in the wagon." "I did not want special treatment." "It is not special treatment. It is common sense. If your hands get infected, you will not be able to work at all." He retrieved a small tin from the wagon and returned with strips of clean cloth and a small jar of what looked like salve. "This will sting." He was right. The salve burned when he applied it to her broken blisters, but Beatrice did not flinch. Isaac wrapped her hands carefully, his touch methodical and practiced. "You have done this before," she observed. "Every new ranch hand goes through the same thing. Blisters are part of the job until your hands toughen up." He finished tying off the bandages and looked up at her. "You did good work this morning, better than I expected." "Because I am a woman?" "Because you are new to this kind of labor." His blue eyes held hers. "Most people, men or women, would have quit by now. The fact that you did not says something about your character." It was the most personal thing he had said to her, and Beatrice felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. "Thank you." They worked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, finally finishing the fence repairs as shadows lengthened across the scrubland. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, all 4 of them too exhausted for conversation. Beatrice's entire body ached, and she knew she would feel even worse tomorrow. But she had survived the first day. As they unloaded the tools back at the barn, Marcus Webb appeared, his expression skeptical. "How did she do?" he asked Isaac, as though Beatrice were not standing right there. "She kept up," Isaac said simply. "No complaints." Marcus grunted, clearly not convinced this proved anything. "We will see how long that lasts. Tomorrow you are all riding out to move the herd from the south pasture. That will be a different kind of test." After the foreman left, Isaac turned to Beatrice. "You should soak those hands in salt water tonight. It will help them heal, and get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder than today." "Everything is harder than the day before," Beatrice said with a tired smile. "That is how you know you are still alive." Something flickered in Isaac's expression, something that might have been admiration, or perhaps simply recognition of a kindred spirit. "Get some food and sleep. Dawn comes early." That night, Beatrice did soak her hands as instructed, gritting her teeth against the sting of salt water on raw flesh. She ate the simple meal of beans and cornbread that the ranch cook provided, then collapsed onto her narrow bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept drifting back to Isaac, the careful way he had bandaged her hands, the quiet respect in his voice when he told the foreman she had kept up, the intensity of his blue eyes when he looked at her. She barely knew him, but already she sensed he was different from other men she had met. He had defended her, yes, but not in the patronizing way of someone who thought her weak. Instead, he had simply given her the opportunity to prove herself. That, more than anything, made her want to live up to his expectations. The next morning came too soon. Beatrice's muscles screamed in protest as she forced herself out of bed and dressed in the dim pre-dawn light. Her hands throbbed despite the bandages, but she rewrapped them as best she could and headed to the barn. Isaac was already there with 3 horses saddled and ready. He handed her the reins to Rusty, the temperamental chestnut from 2 days ago. "We will be moving about 200 head from the south pasture to fresh grazing land closer to the ranch. It is a full day's work, and we will need every hand we have. Think you can handle it?" "Yes," Beatrice said, though truthfully she was not entirely sure what moving cattle involved beyond what she had read in dime novels. They rode out with 5 other ranch hands as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The south pasture was nearly an hour's ride away, and by the time they arrived, Beatrice's thighs were already sore from yesterday's riding, but she pushed the discomfort aside and focused on watching the other hands as they began spreading out around the grazing herd. Isaac rode up beside her, his horse moving easily alongside Rusty. "The key is to move them slowly and calmly, no sudden movements or loud noises. We want them flowing like a river, not stampeding. Stay on the left flank and keep any stragglers moving with the group. If one breaks off, guide it back gently. Can you do that?" "I will do my best. That is all anyone can ask." He paused, then added, "If anything goes wrong, if you feel unsafe, ride clear and let someone else handle it. Understood?" Beatrice wanted to bristle at the special instruction, but she recognized the genuine concern in his voice. This was not about her being a woman. This was about her being new to this particular work. Understood. The process of moving the herd was simultaneously more tedious and more exhilarating than Beatrice had imagined. The cattle were massive beasts, their horns wide and dangerous, but most moved placidly enough when guided by experienced riders. Beatrice found her rhythm quickly, using Rusty's agility to cut off potential stragglers and guide them back to the main group. About 2 hours into the drive, a young bull decided to make a break for freedom, charging away from the herd toward a ravine. Without thinking, Beatrice urged Rusty into a gallop, racing to cut off the bull's escape route. She managed to get ahead of the animal and turned Rusty sharply, using her body language and position to redirect the bull back toward the herd. It worked. The bull, faced with a determined horse and rider, thought better of its escape attempt and trotted back to rejoin the others. Beatrice's heart was pounding, adrenaline singing through her veins, but she felt triumphant. "Nice work!" one of the other hands called out, and she caught Isaac watching her from across the herd, something that might have been a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The drive continued through the blazing heat of midday. Dust coated everything, getting into Beatrice's nose and mouth no matter how she tried to cover her face. The sun was merciless, and she could feel her skin burning despite the protection of her bonnet. But the work was engaging in a way that fence mending had not been. There was a constant flow to it, a need to stay alert and responsive. By the time they finally guided the herd into the new pasture and closed the gate behind the last straggling cow, the sun was beginning its descent. Beatrice was coated in dust and sweat, her body aching in new and interesting ways, but she felt more alive than she had in months. As the hands began the ride back to the ranch, Isaac fell in beside her again. "You did well today. That bull you turned back, some experienced hands would have hesitated on that." "I did not really think about it," Beatrice admitted. "I just saw he was running and knew someone had to stop him. That is instinct. You cannot teach that." He studied her for a moment. "You are surprising me, Beatrice Dawson." It was the first time he had used her given name, and she liked the way it sounded in his low voice. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Definitely good." His smile was brief but genuine, transforming his weathered face into something warmer. "Marcus was wrong about you." "Does that mean I will get to stay past the week?" "That is not my decision to make, but if he asks my opinion, I will tell him you have earned your place here." They rode the rest of the way back in comfortable silence, and Beatrice found herself very aware of Isaac's presence beside her. She noticed small things she had been too exhausted or focused to see before: the easy way he sat his horse, the competence in every movement, the occasional glimpses of kindness beneath his reserved exterior. That evening, after caring for the horses and grabbing a quick meal, Beatrice returned to her small room and discovered that someone had left a bundle outside her door. Inside was a proper work shirt and trousers, worn but clean, along with a pair of leather work gloves that would fit her hands. There was no note, but somehow she knew they were from Isaac. The gesture touched her more than she wanted to admit. She had been managing in her dresses, but proper work clothes would make everything easier, and the gloves would protect her still healing hands. It was thoughtful in a way that spoke to Isaac's character: quiet kindness without expectation of thanks or recognition. The rest of the week passed in a blur of hard work. Beatrice mended more fences, helped break a young horse to saddle, learned to throw a rope with reasonable accuracy, and earned grudging respect from most of the ranch hands. Her body adapted to the brutal schedule, her hands toughening into calluses, her muscles growing stronger. By the time Marcus Webb approached her on the 8th day, she knew she had proven herself. "I will admit when I am wrong," the foreman said gruffly. "You have done good work this week. If you want to stay on, the job is yours. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board." $30 was more money than Beatrice had ever earned in her life. "Thank you, sir. I accept." Marcus nodded. "Keller speaks highly of you, says you have good instincts and you are not afraid of hard work. That is high praise coming from him. He does not waste words on flattery." After the foreman left, Beatrice went looking for Isaac to thank him for his support. She found him in the barn, working on repairing a saddle by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, setting aside the leather he had been stitching. "I heard you were staying on," he said. "Thanks to you. Marcus said you spoke to him about me." Isaac shrugged. "I only told him the truth. You proved yourself. That is all you, not me." Beatrice moved closer, suddenly aware that they were alone in the barn, the lamplight creating an intimate circle of golden light around them. "I wanted to thank you for the clothes and gloves too. That was very kind." They were just extras lying around. Seemed wasteful not to use them. She smiled at his attempt to downplay the gesture. "Well, thank you anyway. They helped." For a long moment they stood there, the air between them charged with something neither seemed ready to name. Isaac's blue eyes were shadowed in the lamplight, but Beatrice could feel the weight of his gaze on her. Finally, he cleared his throat and looked back down at the saddle. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we are riding out early to check the water sources in the west section. It has been a dry summer, and we need to make sure the cattle have enough to drink." "I will be ready," Beatrice said softly. As she turned to leave, she paused at the barn door. "Isaac?" He looked up again. "Yes? I am glad you spoke up for me that first day. Not just because I needed the job, but because it led me here. To this place. To this work. To you," she did not say, but the words hung unspoken between them. Something in his expression softened. "I am glad I spoke up too. Good night, Beatrice." "Good night." The summer weeks passed, and Beatrice settled into the rhythm of ranch life. The work remained demanding, but she had stopped surprising the other hands with her competence. She was simply one of the crew now, accepted if not entirely welcomed. The exception was Isaac, who seemed to seek out her company whenever duties permitted. They often rode together, checking fence lines or moving cattle, and their conversations gradually became more personal. She learned that he had come to Texas from Virginia 5 years ago after his parents died in a fire. He had been working ranches ever since, moving from place to place until he found the crossed swords and decided to stay. "What made this place different?" Beatrice asked one afternoon as they rode along the boundary of the ranch property. Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. "I guess I was tired of moving, tired of feeling like I did not belong anywhere. This ranch, this land, it feels right somehow, like I could put down roots here. I understand that feeling. I have been searching for that same thing since my father died." He glanced at her. "Have you found it?" Beatrice looked out across the vast Texas landscape, the rolling scrubland dotted with mesquite and cactus, the endless blue sky overhead. "I think maybe I am starting to." As August gave way to September, the brutal heat began to moderate slightly, though the sun remained relentless. Beatrice had bronzed under its constant attention. Her hands were tough with calluses, and she moved with the confident ease of someone who knew her work. She had also become more aware of her growing feelings for Isaac. It was in the small things, the way her heart lifted when she saw him in the morning, the electric charge she felt when their hands accidentally brushed, the way she found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking. She had never felt this way about anyone before, this combination of respect, attraction, and deep liking. She suspected he felt something similar, but Isaac Keller was not a man who rushed into anything. His few personal revelations had shown her someone who had been hurt by loss and had learned to protect himself through emotional distance. Breaking through that reserve would take time and patience. The turning point came in late September during a sudden thunderstorm. Beatrice and Isaac had ridden out to check on a section of fence that had been damaged by cattle, and they were miles from the ranch when dark clouds rolled in with startling speed. Within minutes, the sky opened up with a deluge that turned the dry earth to mud. "We need to find shelter," Isaac shouted over the roar of rain and thunder. "There is an old line shack about a mile north. We can wait out the storm there." They urged their horses into a gallop, racing against the storm. Lightning cracked across the sky, and the horses were wild-eyed with fear. By the time they reached the tiny one-room cabin, they were both soaked through and shivering despite the warm air. Isaac quickly saw to the horses, tying them under a small overhang that provided minimal protection, while Beatrice pushed open the door to the cabin. Inside was a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table and chair, and a narrow bunk built into one wall. It smelled of dust and disuse, but it was dry. Isaac entered behind her, water streaming from his hat and clothes. He moved immediately to the stove, checking to see if there was any firewood left from the last time someone had used the shelter. Finding a few pieces of dry wood and kindling, he set about building a fire. Beatrice stood dripping by the door, her teeth beginning to chatter now that the adrenaline of the ride was fading. The temperature had dropped with the storm, and her wet clothes clung to her uncomfortably. "You need to get out of those wet things," Isaac said without looking up from the fire. "There should be an old blanket in the trunk under the bunk. It might be dusty, but it is better than nothing." She found the blanket, and Isaac turned his back to give her privacy while she stripped off her soaked shirt and trousers, wrapping herself in the rough wool. It smelled of mothballs and age, but it was dry and surprisingly warm. "You should change too," she said. "You are just as wet." "I will be fine once the fire gets going." "Isaac Keller, do not be stubborn. You will catch your death if you stay in those wet clothes." He glanced at her over his shoulder, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was a vulnerability there she had not seen before, a crack in his usual composure. "There is only one blanket, then we will share it." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither had voiced before. Isaac stood slowly, and Beatrice could see the internal debate playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded once and began removing his own wet clothing, hanging his shirt and trousers near the fire to dry. Beatrice turned away to give him privacy, her heart pounding. When she felt him sit down beside her on the bunk, she adjusted the blanket so it draped around both their shoulders. They sat close together, their bare arms touching, sharing warmth and the shelter of the rough wool. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the small cabin, the fire began to catch, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Neither of them spoke for a long time, the tension between them building with each passing minute. "Beatrice," Isaac said finally, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the faint scar on his jawline, the way water still dripped from his dark hair. "What is it?" I have been trying to keep my distance from you, trying to maintain a professional relationship because you work on the ranch and I did not want to make things complicated. He paused, his jaw tightening. But I am failing miserably at that. Her heart felt like it might beat out of her chest. Why are you failing? Because every time I am near you, all I want to do is this. He lifted his hand and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I have been half in love with you since you climbed on that horse the first day and proved everyone wrong. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. Only half in love? A smile curved his lips, transforming his serious face. Maybe more than half. She leaned in, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, but then Isaac's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking free. His lips were warm against hers, and she felt the careful control he had maintained slipping away as he kissed her with growing urgency. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I should not have done that. If Marcus finds out, it could cause problems for you. I do not care about problems, Beatrice said firmly. I care about you. I have cared about you for weeks now, Isaac. I was just waiting for you to realize it. He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. I realized it. I have just been trying to be honorable about the whole thing. Maybe I do not want you to be quite so honorable. Beatrice Dawson, are you trying to compromise my virtue? His tone was teasing, but his eyes were serious. Only if you want to be compromised. He kissed her again, and this time there was less restraint, more heat. They were still wrapped in the single blanket, their bodies pressed close together, and Beatrice felt desire unfurl in her belly like a flower opening to the sun. She had never felt this way before, never wanted anyone the way she wanted Isaac in this moment. But even as the kiss grew more passionate, Isaac pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged. We should stop, not because I want to, but because I respect you too much to do this the wrong way. Beatrice felt a surge of affection for this man, who could maintain his principles even when clearly struggling with desire. What is the right way? The right way is me courting you properly, taking you to town for dinner, maybe a dance if San Antonio has one, letting everyone know my intentions are honorable. He tucked a strand of her still damp hair behind her ear. The right way is me eventually asking you to marry me, if you will have me. Her breath caught. Are you asking me now? Not yet. But I am telling you that I intend to, that I am serious about this, about us. You mean more to me than just a stolen moment in a lined shack during a storm. His blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her shiver. You deserve to be courted and cherished, not rushed. Tears did spill over then, but they were happy tears. I love you, Isaac Keller. I love you too, Beatrice Dawson, more than I thought possible. He kissed her forehead gently. Now, let us sit here by the fire like respectable people until the storm passes and our clothes dry. They sat together, the blanket wrapped around both of them, and talked quietly about everything and nothing. Isaac told her about his childhood in Virginia, the beautiful mountains and the small farm where he had grown up. Beatrice shared memories of her father, the lessons he had taught her about hard work and integrity, and the pain of losing him. The storm eventually passed, leaving the world outside washed clean and smelling of wet earth. By the time they rode back to the ranch, their clothes were mostly dry, though wrinkled, and the sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink. They were careful not to show too much familiarity in front of the other ranch hands, but Beatrice caught Isaac's secret smiles and the way his hand lingered on hers when he helped her dismount. That night, she lay in her narrow bed, feeling happier than she could remember being in years. True to his word, Isaac began courting her properly. He took her into San Antonio the following Saturday, and they had dinner at a small restaurant before attending a social at the local church hall. Beatrice wore her one good dress, a simple green cotton that she had saved for special occasions, and Isaac wore a clean shirt and his best vest. Dancing with him in the crowded hall, feeling his hand at her waist and his other hand clasping hers, Beatrice felt like the luckiest woman alive. They talked and laughed, and for a few hours, they were not ranch hands, but simply a young man and woman falling in love. The other ranch hands teased them good-naturedly when word got around that Isaac and Beatrice were courting. Even Marcus Webb, despite his initial skepticism, seemed pleased by the development. About time, Keller found himself a good woman, he told Beatrice one afternoon. He has been alone too long. As autumn deepened and the days grew shorter, Isaac and Beatrice spent every spare moment together. They rode out to check cattle and ended up stopping to watch the sunset. They worked side by side, mending fences, and talked about their hopes for the future. Slowly, they were building something solid and real, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. In November, as the first hints of winter began to touch the Texas plains, Isaac took Beatrice on a ride to a spot he said was special to him. They rode for over an hour, climbing into the rocky hills north of the ranch until they reached a promontory that overlooked miles of rolling land. "This is where I come when I need to think," Isaac said, as they dismounted and stood at the edge of the overlook. "When I first came to the Crossed Swords, I found this place and realized I wanted to stay. The land here feels like it goes on forever, like there is room to breathe and dream." Beatrice stood beside him, taking in the vast view. The late afternoon sun painted everything in gold and amber, and the wind carried the scent of sage and dust. "It is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you." Isaac turned to face her, his expression serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "Beatrice Dawson, I know we have only known each other a few months, but they have been the best months of my life. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting. You have turned this ranch from just a job into a home." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small garnet stone. "It was my mother's ring. It is the only thing I have left of her, and I would be honored if you would wear it. Will you marry me?" Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, Isaac, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting all these years for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "I promise I will make you happy," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will build us a life here. We can save up and maybe buy our own small piece of land someday, start our own ranch." "I am already happy," Beatrice said, touching his face gently. "I have you, and that is everything I need. Everything else is just extra." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the San Antonio church, with the ranch hands serving as witnesses and Marcus Webb standing in as a father figure to give Beatrice away. She wore a simple white dress that the local seamstress had helped her make, and Isaac wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous in equal measure. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that several of the watching ranch hands wiped their eyes. The celebration afterward was rowdy and joyful, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Marcus Webb had given them a wedding gift that left both of them speechless, a small parcel of land on the edge of the Crossed Swords property and lumber to build a modest house. "You have both earned it," the foreman said gruffly. "Keller has been my best hand for years, and Beatrice, you proved me wrong in the best possible way. Consider this my apology and my blessing." Over the winter months, with the help of the other ranch hands, Isaac and Beatrice built their house. It was small, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. They worked on it together in their spare time, and Beatrice learned how to hammer nails and fit boards as competently as she had learned to rope cattle. By early spring of 1882, they moved into their new home. The first night in their own bed, in their own house, on their own land, felt like a dream made real. Isaac held Beatrice close as they lay together, the windows open to let in the cool night air and the sounds of the prairie. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible," Beatrice replied. She thought back to that first day at the Crossed Swords Ranch, standing in the hiring line, while the foreman told her she was too pretty for hard work. If someone had told her then that within a year she would be married to a wonderful man, living in her own house, and doing work she loved, she would not have believed them. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, sensing her reverie. "About how far we have come, about how the foreman said I was too pretty for hard work, and you said I was tougher than anyone knew." Isaac chuckled. "I was right. You usually are," Beatrice teased, then grew more serious. "Thank you for seeing me, Isaac. Not just how I looked, but who I was underneath. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You gave yourself the chance by not giving up. I just opened the door. You walked through it on your own strength." He kissed the top of her head. That is one of the things I love most about you. Your strength, your determination, your refusal to let anyone define you by their limitations. They continued working for the Cross Swords Ranch, saving every penny they could. Isaac had dreams of expanding their small property, of raising their own cattle someday. Beatrice shared those dreams, and together they planned for a future that felt full of possibility. In the summer of 1882, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her body changing in subtle ways. But when the doctor in San Antonio confirmed it, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out on the frontier, and she knew too many women who had not survived it. When she told Isaac that evening, sitting together on the porch of their little house, watching the sun set, he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "Are you scared?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, "but also excited. We are going to be parents, Isaac." "We are," he said wonderingly, "a little person who is part both of us." Over the following months, Isaac became almost comically protective. He did not want Beatrice doing any heavy lifting or working with the more dangerous cattle. She tolerated his concern with good humor, though she also insisted on continuing most of her regular work as long as she felt capable. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him more than once. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Isaac said stubbornly. "Not my child she is carrying. I will not risk either of you." His protectiveness came from love, and Beatrice could not fault him for that. She compromised, taking on lighter duties and letting the other hands handle the more strenuous work. Marcus Webb, surprisingly supportive, made sure she was never asked to do anything that might put her or the baby at risk. In February of 1883, on a cold night with stars blazing overhead, Beatrice went into labor. Isaac rode frantically into San Antonio to fetch the doctor, but by the time they returned, the ranch cook's wife, who had experience with birthing, had already helped Beatrice deliver a healthy baby boy. Isaac burst into the house, the doctor on his heels, to find his wife exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "You have a son," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. Isaac approached almost reverently, looking down at the impossibly small face of his firstborn child. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and, when he opened his eyes briefly, they were the same blue as his father's. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe you did this." They named him James Isaac Keller, after Beatrice's father, James, and his father, Isaac. The baby was healthy and strong-lunged, making his presence known at all hours. Those early weeks were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Isaac proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring James to Beatrice for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and walking the floor with his son when the baby was fussy. Watching her husband with their child, Beatrice fell in love with Isaac all over again. He was gentle and patient with their son, singing soft songs in the middle of the night and talking to James as though the baby could understand every word. Life settled into a new rhythm. Beatrice took several months away from ranch work to care for James, but by the time he was 6 months old, she was ready to return to her duties part-time. The ranch cook's wife was happy to watch James during the day, and Beatrice found she needed the physical work to feel like herself again. The seasons passed, each bringing its own challenges and joys. Their small herd of personal cattle grew slowly but steadily. Isaac proved to have an excellent eye for good breeding stock, and their animals were healthy and strong. The little house on the edge of the Cross Swords property began to feel less like a shelter and more like a true home, filled with love and laughter and the chaotic energy of a growing child. When James was 2 years old, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, knowing what to expect, though she respected the dangers just as much. Their second child, a daughter they named Mary Elizabeth, arrived in the spring of 1885, and she was the spitting image of her mother with honey-colored hair and delicate features. "She is going to be beautiful," Isaac said, cradling his daughter in his large, work-roughened hands. "She is going to be tough," Beatrice corrected with a smile. "Beauty is nice, but strength is what matters." Isaac laughed. "She will be both, just like her mother." The years continued to unfold, each one building on the last. By 1887, Isaac and Beatrice had saved enough to buy an additional 200 acres adjacent to their original parcel. It was not a huge ranch by Texas standards, but it was theirs, and they worked it together with pride. James was now 4 years old and already showing signs of his father's affinity for horses and cattle. He followed Isaac everywhere, a miniature shadow learning the ways of ranch life. Mary, at 2 years old, was fearless and curious, getting into everything despite her mother's best efforts to keep her safe. Marcus Webb retired that year, and the owner of the Crossed Swords Ranch offered Isaac the position of foreman. It was a significant honor and came with a substantial increase in pay. Isaac accepted, knowing the extra income would help them continue to build their own ranch. Beatrice could not help but think back to the first day when Marcus had dismissed her as too pretty for hard work. Now, here she was, the wife of the new foreman, a capable ranch hand in her own right, and the mother of 2 healthy children. She had proved everyone wrong who had doubted her, but more importantly, she had proved to herself that she was capable of anything she set her mind to. One evening in the fall of 1887, Isaac and Beatrice sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times over the years. The children were asleep inside, and the world was quiet except for the evening sounds of the prairie, cattle lowing in the distance, birds settling for the night, the whisper of wind through the grass. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked suddenly. "Coming to Texas, taking a job on a cattle ranch, marrying a simple cowboy?" Beatrice turned to look at her husband, this man who had believed in her when no one else did, who had loved her for her strength as much as her beauty, who had built a life with her through hard work and determination. His face was more weathered now, lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "I regret nothing," she said firmly. "Every choice I made led me here, to you, to this life. I would not change a single moment." Isaac smiled and reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I love you, Beatrice Keller. More now than I did 6 years ago, if that is even possible." "It is possible," she said softly, "because I feel the same way." They sat together in the gathering darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The ranch spread out around them, the land they had fought for and worked to improve. Their children slept safely inside the house they had built with their own hands. And tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new moments of joy and struggle, but they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that first day when a foreman said she was too pretty for hard work and a cowboy said she was tougher than anyone knew. He had been right, but what Isaac had not known then was that he was just as tough, just as determined, and together they were unstoppable. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family and their ranch. In 1889, Beatrice gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas James. He was a robust baby with his mother's honey-colored hair and his father's blue eyes, a perfect blend of both parents. James, now 6, took his role as oldest brother seriously, while Mary at 4 was delighted to have a new playmate, even if Thomas was too small to do much more than sleep and eat. The house felt full of life and energy, and though the work was constant, both Isaac and Beatrice thrived on it. Their ranch continued to grow. They had built a proper barn and expanded their herd to nearly 100 head of cattle. It was still small compared to the massive operations like the Crossed Swords, but it was profitable and sustainable. Isaac had a reputation throughout the area as an honest dealer and a skilled cattleman, and buyers sought out their stock specifically. Beatrice had also made a name for herself, though perhaps not in the way she had initially imagined. Other women in San Antonio and the surrounding ranches began seeking her advice, asking how she had managed to work alongside men in such a male-dominated field. She tried to explain that it was simply about proving yourself capable, about not backing down in the face of skepticism. But she understood that her path was not easy to replicate. She became something of a mentor to other young women who wanted to work ranches or farms, teaching them practical skills and encouraging them to stand firm in their abilities. It gave her satisfaction to help others the way Isaac had helped her, by simply giving them a chance to prove themselves. In the summer of 1891, a severe drought hit the region. Water sources dried up, and grass became scarce. It was the hardest challenge Isaac and Beatrice had faced since starting their own ranch. They spent long, exhausting days hauling water from the distant creek, watching their cattle lose weight, despite their best efforts, and worrying about how they would survive if the drought continued. One evening, after an especially difficult day, Isaac sat at their kitchen table with his head in his hands. "I do not know if we can make it through this," he admitted quietly. "If we lose the herd, we lose everything we have built." Beatrice knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "We will make it through. We have survived everything else that has been thrown at us. Remember when Marcus said I was too pretty for hard work? Remember when we had nothing but a dream and determination? We have come too far to give up now." Her words steadied him. They rationed their own water to give more to the cattle. They sold some of their breeding stock at a loss to reduce the burden on their resources. They worked from dawn until well after dark, every single day, refusing to let the drought defeat them. The community around them pulled together. Neighbors helped neighbors, sharing resources and information about where water might still be found. The Cross Swords Ranch, now under Isaac's capable management as foreman, allowed smaller ranchers like Isaac and Beatrice to water their cattle at the ranch's deeper wells, a kindness that likely saved many family operations. When the rains finally came in September, breaking the drought in spectacular fashion, Beatrice stood in their yard with her face turned up to the sky, laughing and crying at the same time. Isaac joined her, and they held each other in the pouring rain, water streaming down their faces, celebrating their survival. They had lost nearly a third of their herd, but they still had their land, their house, and most importantly, each other and their children. They would rebuild, as they always had. By 1893, the ranch had recovered and then surpassed its previous success. They now had over 200 head of cattle, 3 horses of their own, and had even hired a young man to help with the work. The house had been expanded to include another bedroom for the children and a proper parlor where they could entertain guests. James, now 10 years old, was already an accomplished rider and could rope nearly as well as his father. Mary, at 8, was showing an interest in the business side of ranching, always asking questions about prices and profits. Thomas, at 4, was the wild one, fearless and energetic, keeping everyone on their toes. One afternoon, Isaac and Beatrice took a rare moment away from work to ride out to the promontory where Isaac had proposed nearly a decade earlier. The children were with their hired hand, and it felt strange but wonderful to have time alone together. They stood at the overlook, Isaac's arm around Beatrice's waist, looking out at the land that had become their whole world. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here?" Isaac asked. "I remember everything about that day," Beatrice said. "I remember being terrified you would come to your senses and realize you could do better than a woman who worked like a ranch hand." Isaac turned her to face him. "There is no better. There has never been anyone better than you. You are the strongest, most capable, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You are my partner in every sense of the word." "We have built a good life," Beatrice said, emotion thick in her voice. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I stood in that hiring line all those years ago. We have built it together. That is what makes it special." He kissed her softly. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, more dreams to chase, more challenges to overcome." "More children?" Beatrice asked with a teasing smile. Isaac laughed. "Maybe, if you want, or maybe we just enjoy the 3 we have and focus on expanding the ranch instead." "I think 3 is a good number," Beatrice decided. "But I agree we should keep expanding. Maybe we could buy the Patterson place if it ever goes up for sale. That would give us access to the South Creek year-round." They talked about their plans and dreams as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. These moments, stolen from the constant demands of ranch life, were precious. They reminded Isaac and Beatrice why they worked so hard, not just for survival, but to build something lasting, something they could pass down to their children. The turn of the century brought changes to Texas and the ranching industry. Barbed wire was becoming ubiquitous, dividing up the open range. Railways made it easier to ship cattle to market. New breeds were being introduced that could better handle the Texas climate. Isaac and Beatrice adapted to each change, always looking for ways to improve their operation, while maintaining the values that had guided them from the beginning: hard work, integrity, and mutual respect. In 1902, James left home at 19 to attend college in Austin, studying animal husbandry and business. It was bittersweet for Isaac and Beatrice to see their oldest child go, but they were proud of his ambition and intelligence. Mary, now 17, was courting a young rancher from a neighboring property, and Thomas, at 13, was already talking about expanding the family ranch further. Isaac, now 46, had a few more gray hairs, and his hands were permanently gnarled from decades of hard work, but he was still strong and capable. Beatrice, at 42, was still beautiful, though her face bore the marks of years spent under the Texas sun. She wore those marks with pride, each line and weathered patch a testament to the life she had lived. One evening that year, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the past 2 decades, Beatrice reflected on how far they had come. "Do you remember what you said to Marcus that first day?" she asked, "when he said I was too pretty for hard work?" "I said you were tougher than he knew," Isaac replied with a smile. "You barely knew me. How could you have been so sure?" Isaac considered the question seriously. "I saw something in your eyes, a fire, a determination. I recognized it because I had felt the same way myself. Like, you had something to prove, not to others but to yourself, and I knew that kind of determination could not be easily broken. You gave me a chance when no one else would. That changed everything. You made the most of that chance. That was all you." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become second nature over their years together. "We have had a good life, Beatrice. Better than good. Exceptional." "We have had an exceptional partnership," Beatrice corrected. "Neither of us could have built this alone." "No," Isaac agreed. "We needed each other." In 1905, Mary married her rancher Beau in a beautiful ceremony at their ranch, with friends and family coming from miles around to celebrate. She and her husband planned to start their own ranch on land adjacent to her parents' property, keeping the family close. James had returned from college and was working alongside his father, bringing new ideas and modern techniques to the operation. Thomas was 17 and already as skilled a cowboy as anyone in the area. Isaac and Beatrice had achieved something remarkable. They had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy. Their children had learned the values of hard work and integrity, and they were carrying those lessons forward into their own lives. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, Isaac surprised Beatrice with a gift he had been planning for months. He led her outside at sunset to find a beautiful new saddle waiting, custom-made with her name tooled into the leather. 25 years ago, I fell in love with a woman who was willing to fight for her place in a world that did not want to make room for her, Isaac said. You have been my partner, my best friend, my love, my everything. This saddle is so we can continue riding together for the next 25 years and beyond. Beatrice was crying as she ran her hands over the beautiful craftsmanship. It is perfect. You are perfect. Not perfect, just perfectly matched to you. He pulled her into his arms. I love you, Beatrice Keller, more now than ever, if that is even possible. It is possible, she whispered against his chest, because I feel the same way. They rode out together that evening, just the two of them, across land they had fought for and built upon. The sunset painted everything in gold and amber, and Beatrice thought back to that terrified young woman who had stepped up to the hiring line in 1881, desperate for a chance to prove herself. She had been so focused on survival then, on simply making it through each day. She could never have imagined the life she would build. A successful ranch, 3 wonderful children, and a marriage that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger each time. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children's lives and the steady growth of their ranch. James married in 1910 and gave them their first grandchild, a girl named Beatrice after her grandmother. Mary and her husband welcomed twin boys in 1911. Thomas eventually married as well and brought his wife to work the family ranch alongside him. Isaac retired as foreman of the Cross Swords Ranch in 1915, wanting to focus entirely on their own land and enjoy his grandchildren while he still had the energy. He was 60 years old now, his hair almost entirely gray, but his blue eyes were still as sharp as ever. Beatrice, at 55, finally allowed herself to slow down slightly. She still rode every day and kept an eye on the ranch operations, but she also took pleasure in spending time with her grandchildren, teaching them the same lessons about determination and strength that had carried her through life. On warm evenings, Isaac and Beatrice still sat on their porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about their day, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that came from decades of partnership. They had built something that would outlast them, a ranch and a family legacy rooted in the values they held dear. In the spring of 1920, Isaac and Beatrice celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a big celebration. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. As the party wound down and the stars came out, Isaac pulled Beatrice away from the crowd for a private moment. They walked hand in hand to the promontory, that special place where he had proposed so many years ago. The climb was harder now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but they made it to the top and stood looking out at the vast Texas landscape bathed in moonlight. 38 years, Isaac said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you showed up at that hiring line. Other times, it feels like I have known you my entire life. We have lived several lifetimes together, Beatrice said, leaning into his warmth. We have been ranch hands, business owners, parents, grandparents. We have survived droughts and storms and all the challenges that life threw at us. And through it all, we had each other. The best decision I ever made was speaking up for you that day, Isaac said. The second best was asking you to marry me. The best decision I ever made was coming to Texas and refusing to give up when Marcus said I was too pretty for hard work. Beatrice smiled. Though falling in love with you is a close second. Isaac laughed, the sound warm and rich in the night air. Only a close second? Well, if I had not come to Texas, I never would have met you. So, technically, that decision enabled all the others. You always were better with logic than me. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as they stood together, looking out at the land they loved. I want you to know something, Beatrice. These past 38 years, building this life with you, raising our children, creating something lasting, it has been the greatest honor of my life. You made me better than I ever thought I could be. We made each other better, Beatrice corrected softly. That is what love does. It does not complete us as though we were incomplete before. It enhances us, challenges,